Before we get into our study for today, I'd like to invite our sister, Jeannie, up, affectionately known as Mimi to some here. But she approached me this morning and asked if she could just kind of share a few words with you all. And just a little bit of an update on how her recovery is going. So take it from here.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Let's see if I can get through this without crying all over the place. A lot of people have been asking me how it's going, so I figure I'll address that first. Making progress day by day. Got a ways to go yet, but making progress, and that's what I'm concentrating on. And I'll be using the walker for a while yet, so just get used to it. But what I really wanted to share is I'm so thankful to the Lord for putting me here. And I give him all the praise for that, and I thank him for all of you, and I'm so appreciative and so thankful. Came to the hospital and visited me, a whole bunch of everybody, and you have no idea how uplifting that was. Everybody that came prayed. I got cards and flowers that just didn't lift me up, but lifted up a few ladies on the wing. They enjoyed them as well. So you didn't just bless me, you blessed some others. I thank you for the meals that were prepared and the cards, the text messages, the phone calls. You have no idea how wonderful it was. Even some who wanted to visit, but when they were able to visit, I was in rehab. I was doing my exercises. So I wasn't available but the thought that they wanted to come touched and warmed my heart. And know that I got a text message from someone, I'm not mentioning names this morning, who said, thinking about you and praying for you. I was in a really bad spot when I got that, and it just lifted me back up. So know that every card, every message came at a time when I needed it the most, and I know that the Lord orchestrated that, and because it helped me heal. And I'm so thankful that I have the Rise Up family. I love all of you. I pray for you every day. And I'm so thankful that when it was needed, everybody stepped up. Thank you.
That applause is both, we celebrate Jeannie's continual recovery. We also celebrate a God that is in the midst of that. And it's been a wonderful experience just to see God continuing to tell and write Jeannie's story of grace and mercy in her life as she continues to recover. And so, we look forward to a full recovery. And Jeannie, you don't have to apologize about the walker. I think there's a club here starting soon. So at this time, I'm going to invite Jeff Vanderside up. He's going to read our text for today. We are in Genesis chapter 18. So if you brought your Bibles, you can follow along. So Jeff will read our text, and then we'll continue on with our study. So thank you, Jeff.
Thank you. The Lord appeared to Abraham near the great trees of Mamre while he was sitting at the entrance to his tent in the heat of the day. Abraham looked up and saw 3 men standing nearby. When he saw them, he hurried from the entrance of his tent to meet them and bowed low to the ground. He said, "If I have found favor in your eyes, my Lord, do not pass your servant by. Let a little water be brought, and then you may all wash your feet and rest under this tree. Let me get you something to eat, so you can be refreshed and then go on your way. Now that you have come to your servant, very well, they answered, do as you say. So Abraham hurried into the tent to Sarah. Quick, he said, get 3 seahs of the finest flour and knead it and bake some bread. Then he ran to the herd and selected a choice tender calf and gave it to a servant who hurried to prepare it. He then brought some curds and milk and the calf that had been prepared and set these before them. While they ate, he stood near them under a tree. Where is your wife Sarah? They asked him. There in the tent, he said. Then one of them said, I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah your wife will have a son. Now Sarah was listening at the entrance to the tent, which was behind him. Abraham and Sarah were already very old, and Sarah was past the age of childbearing. So Sarah laughed to herself as she thought, after I am worn out and my Lord is old, will I now have this pleasure? Then the Lord said to Abraham, why did Sarah laugh and say, will I really have a child now that I am old? Is anything too hard for the Lord? I will return to you at the appointed time next year, and Sarah will have a son. Sarah was afraid, so she lied and said, I did not laugh. But he said, yes, you did laugh. When the men got up to leave, they looked down towards Sodom, and Abraham walked along with them to see them on their way. Then the Lord said, shall I hide from Abraham what I am about to do? Abraham will surely become a great and powerful nation, and all nations on earth will be blessed through him. For I have chosen him so that he will direct his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing what is right and just, so that the Lord will bring about for Abraham what he has promised him. Then the Lord said, the outcry against Sodom and Gomorrah is so great, and their sin is so grievous, that I will go down and see if what they have done is as bad as the outcry that has reached me. If not, I will know. The men turned away and went toward Sodom, but Abraham remained standing before the Lord. Then Abraham approached him and said, will you sweep away the righteous with the wicked? What if there are 50 righteous people in the city? Will you really sweep it away and not spare the place for the sake of the 50 righteous people in it? Far be it from you to do such a thing, to kill the righteous with the wicked, treating the righteous and the wicked alike. Far be it from you. Will not the judge of all the earth do right? The Lord said, if I find 50 righteous people in the city of Sodom, I will spare the whole place for their sake. Then Abraham spoke up again. Now that I have been so bold as to speak to the Lord, though I am nothing but dust and ashes, what if the number of the righteous is 5 less than 50? Will you destroy the whole city for lack of 5 people? If I find 45 there, he said, I will not destroy it. Once again he spoke to him. What if only 40 are found there, he said. For the sake of 40, I will not do it. Then he said, may the Lord not be angry, but let me speak. What if only 30 can be found there? He answered, I will not do it if I find 30 there. Abraham said, now I have been so bold as to speak to the Lord. What if only 20 can be found there? He said, for the sake of 20, I will not destroy it. Then he said, may the Lord not be angry, but let me speak just one more. What if only 10 can be found there? He answered, for the sake of 10, I will not destroy it. When the Lord had finished speaking with Abraham, he left, and Abraham returned home.
Thank you, Jeff. Jeff was joking with me earlier. He said that passage, it's the first recorded auction in the Bible. So So that's free. There you go. You can take that. If there's one thing I want you to walk away with today, it's that. That was the first recorded auction. So before I do kind of get into our time, I want to make a quick, an opening remark. Traditionally, in traditional Jewish culture, throughout like the way they have their oral history and then their written history, chapters 18 and 19 of Genesis were actually one story. And so the story of Abraham and his interaction with the three visitors naturally flowed into this story of these two visitors now visiting Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, I say that because, in a way, this message this morning, our time here this morning, could be almost part one, and then next week would be part two. But I just want to kind of leave that in our minds so we can sort of, I think it will help us as we approach our time next week. So, But this week, we're going to talk. What we're seeing here in this story is an interaction that Abraham has with these three strangers that arrive. And I'm not sure for you, but when you interact with a stranger, when you interact with someone that you've never seen before, what are the filters that sort of that you see or interact with that person? What are the filters that are sort of in place that sort of lead you towards how you interact, how you speak with them? What I'm thinking of is like maybe it's like your convictions, maybe your beliefs, maybe it has to do with some of the things that you're passionate about. Like when you interact with a stranger, some of us are a little bit more maybe open to interacting with a stranger. Some of us will actually go out of our way to interact with someone who may be out of place. Some of us are a little opposite. Maybe we hold back. We're a little nervous. We're anxious around people who are strangers. We're hesitant. We have more questions. Whatever that input, whatever that filter is, this story in chapter 18 here kind of gives us an idea of what interacting with a stranger looks like, both for Abraham in his context, in his cultural context, and more broadly speaking, for the church, for God's people, that there is this moment, or there's this story here with Abraham where you have this unannounced, interrupted sort of moment where we could say that Abraham is inconvenienced by these three strangers that show up at his tent. And we could think that maybe he seems really going above and beyond the call of hospitality with what he's offering him. And yet there's something to be said there. And it reminded me of a quote I read one time from Henry Nouwen, theologian, pastor, author. He once said that, "I have always been complaining that my work was constantly interrupted. Then I realized that the interruptions were my work." I like that quote. I like that idea because I think often in our lives, if we were just to even remove sort of the Christian aspect of our lives, that when we are doing something and it gets interrupted, we think of that in a negative way. Well, I was doing something and now this interruption has gotten in the way and now it sort of stifles or stalls out my flow of work. And when it comes to relationships, this can be, in this case with strangers, I think that can be even more so. And what this story, I believe, shows us is that interruptions do not get in the way of our work, but actually they are our work as followers of Jesus. And what's sort of unique is this happens just in a really ordinary way. Genesis 18, the story of Abraham, it's a normal Tuesday in the ancient Near East. There's nothing extraordinary about this day. This is an ordinary day where Abraham is sitting outside of his tent like he would do almost any other day. And then three strangers arrive and things begin to change. What we see here, the big idea that I want us to walk away with this morning is that what we do with strangers reveals who we are. It's simple as that. We'll see that in the story of Abraham. We'll be able to apply it to our lives as well. So, Our story, again, it opens. It's a normal day in the ancient Near East, and Abraham is at his tent. Abraham, and you're just catching up with us maybe for the first time, or you've been gone for a little bit. Abraham is a clan leader in the ancient Near East. He has been given this promise by God that he will become a great nation. He will be the father of a great nation. He is married to a woman named Sarah. He is the dad to a son named Ishmael. And he is just sitting outside of his tent. In the ancient Near East, sitting outside your tent, especially in Abraham's case, an elderly person, probably almost 100 years old at this time, it's a sign of respect, it's a sign of responsibility. That as the clan leader, as the person who sits outside of his tribe, outside of his tent, he is there to welcome guests, to hear any sort of civil disagreements, to render some sort of judgment at the time. This is what he is meant to do. He's doing his job, and then suddenly strangers appear. Now, in the ancient Near East, in a world where borders are not so defined as we think of them today, in a world where borders are fluid and sort of changing constantly because of growing power and growing power structures, to be a traveler wandering through the ancient Near East, you were awfully vulnerable. You were vulnerable of being robbed or kidnapped or killed. People just didn't journey out from their particular home or their particular home base or family just for a casual stroll. You were going somewhere, and you were going somewhere with intent. And in this case, it was common that if a stranger entered into your area, into your territory, you would welcome them. That hospitality wasn't so much a kind thing that we would do. Hospitality was almost a regular custom for the time. That hospitality had nothing to do with this idea of trying to show how much better we are from all the other clans because we're the most hospitable one. That hospitality was something because we at that time believed that life is sacred, that life is important, and that when a stranger enters into our midst, we probably should do something to make sure that they maintain life. And so Abraham's actions are not so strange for those in the ancient Near East, are not strange even for the first readers of this story. And if we look at Abraham's actions, they even kind of continue. So not only does he greet these strangers, he runs to them, he bows down before them to greet them, he serves them. He goes out into the field to find a calf. He goes to Sarah and says, grab me 3 seahs, which is about 12 pounds of flour each, so 36 pounds of flour to make bread. That's an awful lot of bread, I feel like. But he's going kind of more, we could argue, right, that Abram's going almost doing more than what is required of him at this time, but there's something there, right? But again, it's customary for this time. See, in this world, hospitality is more than simply an act of kindness. It's a sign of righteousness. It's a sign of who you are and who you worship. And who you worship and their expectations of you. And what we see here is Abraham, again, the leader of a tribe. An elderly man sitting outside his tent, able to render decisions and verdicts to anyone who comes before him. He has an awful lot of power. And what he does in this moment is he exercises hospitality. He extends protection to these strangers. As the story would continue, we see that they move from the doorway into almost a table setting. It's a place where the relationship seems to grow a little bit. That it's one thing to stand outside your home and greet someone. It's another thing to welcome them into your living room or into your dining room, around your dining room table. And so on this normal, ordinary day, Abraham and Sarah welcome in these three guests. And these three guests sit down and they begin to tell Abraham what's going to happen. And they tell Abraham, they remind him of the promise that God has made to him throughout history, throughout the last few years. And then they even say that when we come back this time next year, Abraham, your wife Sarah, she'll be pregnant. She'll be carrying the child, the heir that you have been longing for. And Sarah does something that we talked about last week that Abraham did. When something sounds too good to be true, what do? We laugh because it's just too good to be true. And Sarah does the same thing. She hears these strangers tell her husband that she'll be pregnant in a year from now, and she thinks, no way, no way, and she laughs. And what I love about that story is where it says that when they confront her and say, we heard you, were you not laughing about that? And she said, that wasn't me. And they said, yeah, you did. She laughs at this idea, this preposterous idea, this crazy and wild idea that she, in her 90s, could give birth to a son. And that laughter doesn't offend God. That laughter that Sarah offers up, that maybe some of you, including myself, can relate to, in those moments that seem too good to be true, those don't offend God. God doesn't turn at our laughter and say, well, you shouldn't have laughed. He, if anything, says, I'm going to prove it to you. I'm going to show you that laughter will still come true. That Sarah, you are part of this promise. That you will be a part of this growing nation, this growing family of people that will one day inherit the land that you occupy now. After this interaction around the table, the visitors, they get up to leave, and there's a shift in the story. There's all of a sudden a change. There's this sort of the focus being on Sarah and Abraham and the strangers and how they interact with them, and then the story suddenly shifts because these visitors begin to they leave, and they're on a path, it seems like, or how we can imagine is they're traveling on a path, and now one of these visitors, these strangers, is identified as God himself. Now, there's a lot of discussion about what does this look like? How did God appear? Did he appear as just this angel or this divine being, or was he in a form of another human that Abraham was able to interact with him? We don't know. And the authors of Genesis don't want to tell us because to them it's not important. What is important, though, is what happens on the path. That God begins to ask Abraham, or not ask him, but tell Abraham what his plans are for Sodom and Gomorrah. We were talking about this on Wednesday at our Bible study. It's kind of weird, right? For a sovereign, all-knowing, all-powerful God to ask or to share his plans with a human? Like, why do this? And as we reflected and talked about it more, what we realized, and commentators say this as well, is that this isn't God being impulsive. This isn't God wondering or questioning if his actions are wise. It's God holding up to his end of the covenant that he's made with Abraham. That God made this promise to Abraham that he would make him a great nation, that he would make him a great name, that there were all these things that were going to happen. And just like any other treaty or covenant or promise at that time, you maintain a level of communication with the person you make that promise or covenant with. And so God allows Abraham to be a part of the conversation. He's actually elevating Abraham to the level of a covenant keeper. It's God desire to be transparent with Abraham because he wants to build this relationship with him. And what's sort of nestled right in there is there's verse 19. It says this, God is wondering about adding or about involving Abraham in this conversation. And God says, "For I have chosen him so that he will direct his children and his household after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing what is right and just, so that the Lord will bring about for Abraham what he has promised him." That we see this sort of shaping and molding of Abraham in the moment, that God has chosen him, and that in bringing him into the conversation, he is teaching Abraham, this is what it means to be like me. This is what it means to treat others in my image and in my likeness, and that righteousness and justice, when acted out, look like this. And Abraham, your responsibility is now to pass this on to the next generation and then to the next generation. That God is keeping his covenant, not just for Abraham, but for Israel as a whole. See, the first readers of this story, the first hearers of this story, would have been Israel in exile. Would have been Israel outside of God's promised land. Would be Israel not in a place that's familiar to them, where they are strangers. And when they hear this story told again, they are reminded that God does keep his promise, that God does keep his covenant. And that even in the situation they find themselves in, they are chosen, they are being taught and shaped and formed to learn about the righteousness and justice of God. Now this is this is my favorite part of the story, I would say. God invites Abraham into the story. And Abraham doesn't sit back and remain silent. He doesn't just listen and say, that all sounds great. Abraham continues his hospitality. Because all of a sudden now he is asking others, he's asking God to consider his options. In the ancient Near East, humans did not negotiate with gods. It was a common understanding that the gods, whether it was a big G god or little g gods, that they had the final say on what was happening in their world or in their territory. And so a human going to God and saying, well, let's talk about this was shocking. And so Abraham does something pretty countercultural. He stands, well, I can imagine, face to face with God, and he speaks on behalf of a strange city, a city full of strangers. He doesn't know these people. He knows one person. He knows his nephew Lot is there, but he doesn't know anyone else. And he suddenly begins, right, to intercede, to stand in the gap, to persist with God that God might reconsider his plans for Sodom. One commentator put it this way, I put it down here, that Abraham's righteousness is not seen by his separation from sinners, it is by his interceding for them. That a sign of Abraham's righteousness, which would be credited to him later in the Bible, would be in his act here, that he doesn't hear about the potential outcome of Sodom and say, well, man, glad that's them and not me. He pleads with God. He asks God, would you reconsider this decision? And he begins to slowly, patiently, I imagine with a little bit of fear, ask God, what if you find 50 people? And when God says, okay, I won't destroy the city for 50, then Abraham continues, so about 45. God says, okay, not for 45, okay. Abraham, 30? God says, oh, Yeah, 30. If we can find 30 righteous people, yeah, I guess I can spare them. Abraham's like, man, that's good. All right. 20? Now, I don't know about you, but at this time, if in my sanctified imagination, I'm sort of God's maybe getting a bit of a smirk on his face, like, man, is God thinking, I wonder how low this guy's going to go with me? So God goes, okay, 20. Yeah, we'll do 20. And Abraham's like, oh, man. Whew. At this point, I imagine Abraham's like, well, if I've gone this far, I might as well keep going. God, what about 10? If you can find 10 righteous people in Sodom, would you spare them? God says, I'd do it for 10. Now, again, we might hear this and think, this seems like a God he doesn't seem very strong. He doesn't seem very assertive. He doesn't seem like a God that is all-knowing and all-powerful. No. What I would argue is we see a God who desires mercy. We see a God who wants his people to stand in the gap for others and be an advocate for them. To show hospitality beyond the tangible ways, but show hospitality in even a greater way by saying, God, have mercy on them. God, show them your grace. That the same righteous hospitality that fed the strangers are now the same righteous hospitality that wants to defend the city. That suddenly hospitality is no longer this sort of spear approach. It's this two-pronged approach. That hospitality is this very tangible, real thing that we can extend to strangers. But hospitality is also this way in which we can extend and seek and ask God to show mercy on those who need it. This inevitably allows us to then see this sort of connection to Jesus, to the story of the gospel. There's this profound question that Abraham asks God, will you punish the righteous with the wicked? Will you sweep away even the good with the bad? Surely not. You wouldn't do that, would you, God? And what we see, this moment where God says, he begins to extend his mercy, leaning into it. We see that played out in the personal work of Jesus. But instead of the formula being how many righteous people can we find in order for God to spare everyone and not destroy the wicked, suddenly it's God sending one righteous person, his son Jesus, to spare all of the wicked. That Jesus becomes the only righteous one who God looks at and says, that's all I need. I'll take that and the rest of the world can be saved. That's mercy. It's mercy beyond what we can probably comprehend or understand. And that then is so within this chapter 18 of Genesis, we are already seeing a picture and a shape of the gospel. The picture of a God who comes close to those that he loves. A God who listens to his people. A God that desires to show mercy over judgment and wrath. So what do we learn just from this chapter alone, from chapter 18 in Genesis? I think one thing we see is that righteousness isn't abstract. And what I mean by that is righteousness is not this sort of mental gymnastics that we have to somehow make sense of. That righteousness is not this sort of equation or formula that we have to figure out and answer in order for God to see us as and deem us righteous. That righteousness isn't abstract, it's tangible, it's hands-on. It happens at doorways. It happens around the table. It happens even in the interruptions. That's what righteousness looks like. is how we respond to strangers. It reveals what righteousness is to us, what we consider righteous. In a world, right, in a Christian world, I would say, that says righteousness is making sure that I don't get close to them. According to this story, righteousness is not me staying as far away from them. It's me standing in between them and saying, God, have mercy on them. That's righteousness. It's the righteousness that God has shown us. It's the righteousness that we are called to extend to a broken world. And what we'll see next week is that the same strangers who arrive at Abraham and experience this hospitality, two of them go to Sodom and experience the complete opposite. And there's justice for those who show inhospitality to the stranger. So this week, some reflect, relate, and practice questions for us as we wrap up our time here. Reflect, what actions or qualities come to mind when I think about righteousness? Again, I grew up in a home and I grew up in a context where righteousness was very much about how good I am and making sure that my goodness outweighs the badness of the world. That's what righteousness is. And this challenged me this week. Righteousness is not us or me against them. Righteousness is me willing to engage with them. Us willing to engage with the stranger on the outside. A way to relate to this is, and then how does this chapter challenge my idea of who deserves hospitality? Often, right, I think if I had to answer this question, I would probably say, well, I think I've spent time working in the Hartside district of downtown Grand Rapids. I've spent some time working with some of the unhoused shelters and those in extreme forms of poverty. And I think for a while, right, that was always who deserves hospitality? Well, those individuals, right? Yeah, absolutely. This story has expanded that out more. That there are people in this world who need to experience righteous hospitality, that have their life together. But I may look at them and say, well, at least I don't act and live like them. They deserve my hospitality too. And so that leads to this practicing question. How can we actually put this into practice? Well, I think one is, what does hospitality look like in my context? This is where I hope and I pray that you all can be encouraged. Because you all get to do something that I don't get to do. You get to exist in your context, right? So in the places you work, in the places where you live, where you go to school, the organization or the corporation you work for, you get to exist in that place as yourself. And you get to extend out hospitality in a very natural way. I was sharing this with I lead a Bible study, or I help out with a Bible study at one of the local retirement communities, and I was sharing with them this past week that as a pastor, one of the challenges about being a pastor is that when people find out you're a pastor, they do one of three things. They either tell you their life story, confess all their sins, or don't say anything at all. And so you all have the wonderful privilege that I don't have, which is you get to exist in the context you are and get to extend out hospitality. And so what does that look like in light of Genesis 18? What does hospitality look like in your context in light of what the gospel calls us to do? And I would encourage you to live and to press into that and to see what righteousness looks like through that lens. All right, my friends, as we let's wrap up this time here in a word of prayer. And then we've got a song to sing, and then we'll be out of here. Heavenly Father, thank you for this day, and thank you for waking us up again. Thank you for you and the hospitality you have shown us. A righteous hospitality that comes not through just providing for our stomachs or the roofs over our head, a hospitality that involves your Son and his righteousness and the wonderful exchange that happens. That hospitality looks like you opening up your arms and welcoming us into your family through your Son, Jesus. And so as those who are called to not just reflect you, but your Son, our Savior, may we do that full of grace and mercy. May we, as your church, extend a righteous hospitality to our neighbors and our friends in our community. And may your spirit, may it partner with us so that as we go out into our communities, into our context, into our social circles, our hospitality is not for our own benefit, but for the glory of your name and the good of your kingdom. And Father, as we patiently wait to see what that will look like in the time ahead, may your Spirit give us the patience and the perseverance to continue. We pray all this now in Jesus' name, and all God's people said, amen. All right, friends, I invite you to stand as we close out. We're going to sing one more song, and then we'll have the benediction.